Dobra, dzisiaj są tu w Bratislava na chwilę kongresu. I will now revert to my native language, which only I can understand. I would like to thank the university here for inviting me to this 90th celebration of FIEP's existence, and I look forward to sharing with you in the next 30 minutes or so some reflections based on research evidence in Europe for the last 20 years or so. But also I look forward to the rest of the Congress, where there will be an opportunity to meet with new friends, meet with old friends, and continue to share ideas and exchange views on a number of issues. I think the first point I want to make about my presentation is that the title is a play on words. The word Britha, spelled in two ways in the English language, is pronounced the same, but it has two very different meanings, which I will explain when I come to the relevant slide. I want to begin by talking to you about the story of physical education in Europe. Over 2 centuries, national systems of physical education have developed in Europe, and they developed through imported aspects, exchange, interchanged influences. It's what I would call a melting pot development. And those importations, those exchanges, have variously been adopted, adapted, or in some cases assimilated to create a rich, diverse tapestry of similarities, differences, and equivalences in terminological definition, in physical education concept, in contextual setting, and in practice. Now, as present-day attention begins to turn to concepts such as physical and health literacy, in which healthy well-being, active lifestyles, and lifelong physical activity participation have a very significant presence, that tapestry will continue to evolve in a progressive kind of way. There will be developmental changes in some instances, and we may even find some policies include back to the future policies and practices at national levels. The long-standing presence of physical education in school curriculum is in some countries been around for 2 centuries, suggests that it's passed the test of time. Passed the test of time because it's an accepted sphere of formalised educational activity. Indeed, its significance is enshrined in the UNESCO Charter from 1978, which accords physical education the status of a fundamental human right, with assured opportunities for practice within education. In recent years, the role of physical education has expanded. When you look at some of the documentation, and I was interested in the minister's quotation today about the things ascribed to physical education, very clearly, PE now has an expanded role to play in the lives of young people. It's been granted a broad brush scope. It has potential to resolve and the propensity to resolve a whole series of contemporary issues. And I think classically, one political policy response is that of what is ascribed to physical education by the European Parliament resolution of 2007. Now, I wanted to take a moment just to look at that and reflect on it and see what is being ascribed to physical education. And my question to you, can all of those things that physical education is supposed to achieve be achieved in countries, in schools, where there is only 30 minutes of physical education per week? So I think there are fundamental questions to be asked about the situation that physical education finds itself in. Now, pretty clearly, the resolution was a very significant step in policy guidance in Europe. And throughout the world, I think that was a unique step that the resolution actually took. But it is the propensity of physical education and what it is supposed to achieve that worries me, given the research evidence. Now, the research evidence is showing that there are a number of concerns in and about physical education in this 21st century. And those concerns were even manifest in the Council of Europe resolution itself, which I will come back to in a few moments. Surveys conducted in the 1990s, beginning with two surveys in Europe, one of them was sponsored by UPIA, European Physical Education Association, highlighted some of the weaknesses in physical education in the European theatre in the 1990s. I myself, in conjunction with the research assistant of mine, Joe Marshall, produced a worldwide survey, which was conducted in 1999, and the results were formally published in the year 2000. But the concerns that I've referred to were highlighted in the survey, not only of UPIA, but also the one that I carried out. And a consequence of the worldwide survey was a meeting in Berlin, which was the first World Summit, interestingly held in Europe, agreed an agenda action for physical education. And that action agenda, was put forward to UNESCO, and UNESCO agreed to it. So there was intergovernmental agency support at international level for the Berlin action agenda. Now, what happened in Europe as a consequence of the Berlin action agenda? Well, all the Council of Europe conducted research of physical education in Council of Europe countries, so 49, 50 countries at the time, 2002. They had a series of recommendations, all of which were positive about what physical education should be achieving, what countries should be doing about progressing it into a better quality kind of way. 4 years later, the European Parliament, in conjunction with, the European Parliament is a bit of a misnomer, because the European Parliament that commissioned research was really the European Union group, whereas the resolution that came out was a joint resolution of the Council of Europe, which comprised the European Union and the European Parliament, just to complicate things. Now, I've already highlighted what that resolution was actually saying. So, the early part of the 21st century begins to send a message that on the one hand there are some very positive initiatives being undertaken, and Europe provides a good example of that. But on the other hand, the research evidence was continuing to show that there were considerable reasons for concern. And in fact, the European resolution itself referred to, and this is in the sentence or three after the resolution, the general resolution, A, deficiencies in physical education in Europe, highlighting the decrease in the number of physical education lessons, inadequacies in facilities and equipment, particularly in Central and Eastern Europe, but also problems in Western Europe, inadequately prepared teachers, especially in primary school teaching physical education, and also inadequate community school leaders. Now, I want you to remember those because they're going to have some relevance for the evidence I'm going to present to you later on. So what is occurring here is that there are very clear gaps between those positive kind of developments and the concerns that the research evidence was at that time exposing, and I have to say, continues to expose. So there's a gap between the hope and what's actually happening, or as Maud de Boer-Ketchur, who's the Deputy General Secretary of the European Parliament at the time, said, the crux of the issue, the crux of the problem, is that there's a gap between reality and promise. In other words, there's a gap between rhetoric, policy level, government level, and practice. The implementation of physical education in the system. So, we now come to the winner or wither there are two interpretations here. If we take the first interpretation, we're actually looking at a situation of physical education going into decline. Wither is rather like a plant which, not receiving any water, eventually dries up, withers, and dies. So one scenario would be that physical education is at the stage in Europe, and indeed in the rest of the world, where it may be dying. But on the other hand, there's a more positive view, where you say, wither, meaning which direction is physical education going? Is it actually going into decline, or is it going into the formation, the development of a new kind of physical education in terms of the evolution of that tapestry? So now, you hopefully can understand the difference between dying and the direction that we're moving. Now, in terms of the direction that we're moving, with an H, which direction is it being? Is it the direction of a meatloaf-esque, dark, insecure, gloom and doom world? Or is it one of a blue sky world of problem resolution? But that then brings me on to the content of my presentation. I want to give you an overview of the perspective of the direction of PE and how to progress it. But in the time that I have allocated, it will be impossible to give you a detailed overview. So what I've decided to do is to select areas from the latest survey, which has fairly recently been completed, in fact completed earlier this year, but also refer to a nuclear survey that was carried out in 2011-12 onto the Eurodice report that again was published this year, all three of which are sending out similar kinds of messages. So the selected areas are: one, what is the general situation of physical education in schools? Two, what about curriculum time allocation? Three, let's look at some of the curriculum content issues and also the issues of school community pathway legacy. So we move to the general situation of PE. Now, please note here that I'm looking, I'm looking here at making comparisons in the longitudinal perspective of the situation in 2000, the situation in 2007, and the situation in 2013. Now, what that longitudinal information is telling us is that in Europe, physical education is either a legal requirement or it is generally practiced in 100% of countries. That's the good news. Globally, we find 92%, 95%, 97%. That's also good news. It's increasing in terms of its appearance in school curriculum. Now, in terms of the general PE situation, there are very clear variations in provision across the world, and certainly within Europe. The number of lessons varies from 0.5 in some countries to 6 lessons a week in other countries. Weeks per year, some countries only have 16 weeks a year, other countries have 60 weeks per year, when PE is actually taught. The years taught varies from 8 years to 14, with a cluster around about 11 to 12 years. Now, there is a significance in terms of the number of weeks and the start-end years. Research tends to show that the longer children follow physical education lessons in schools, the delay will occur in dropping out from physical activity once they left school. So that I think is a very significant factor. Now, the bad news is, whilst on the one hand in Europe we see 100% featuring on the curriculum, in 2000 we find that the curriculum is being delivered in accordance with regulations in 93% of the country. Globally, it was only 71%. And in 2012, in fact, that's the 2013 figure, it's actually reduced to 84. So over the 12-year period, there has been an increase in the number of schools or the number of countries not implementing physical education in accordance with regulations. Now, you can read as well as I can, that these are some of the reasons why the implementation of PE is not in accordance with regulations. Development of information responsibilities, head teachers, some of their teachers have no interest in PE. Competing prioritized subjects, computer studies, new subject in the curriculum, somebody's got to go, what goes, PE. Lack of official assessment. In some countries there is no official assessment. That's indicative of PE status. PE generally has lower status than other subjects. Inadequate material resources, deficiencies in number of qualified personnel, etc., etc. But also notice the one right at the bottom, PE class exemptions. How many other subjects, apart from physical education schools, do children bring notes from their parents to excuse them from that particular subject in physical education? Does it happen in maths, languages, science, and so on and so on? No, it doesn't happen. And that's indicative, again, of the kind of physical education status that it has. Now, here are some quotations. I deliberately moved the national origin and put them into sort of European geographical regions. But there are some teachers and others' comments about why is PE not delivered in my country or my school in accordance with regulations. Now, in Eastern Europe, this person is telling us it's a fact that it's a main subject, it's including the curricula, but because of the basic facilities, the obligatory requirements are not realised fully. And then at the bottom, in an Iberian context, it doesn't exist in some primary schools, and in some secondary schools, it doesn't have the hours ensured. So here we're getting some qualitative evidence about the situation of physical education you begin to find yourself in. Now let me move on to curriculum time allocation. Because of time, I'm not going into the complexities of how you go about determining what curriculum time is actually on the curriculum per week in school. And there's a whole host of reasons for this. What I can do, however, in this presentation, identify for you some general tendencies based on the evidence that's been collected over a period of time. Now again, I'm comparing the years 2000, 2007, 2013, primary and secondary schools. I'm also comparing the European situation with the global situation. In 2001, Europe, on average, had 121 minutes per week devoted to physical education in primary school. 2012, so 2013 wrong, it's 112, slightly increasing from 2007. Globally, we can see a fall in the first part of the decade, and then a slight increase in the second part of the decade. In secondary schools, a similar kind of story. 143 minutes in Europe is a gross distortion, and there are reasons why it shows so high. I won't go into those reasons, but if you are interested, I have a long version of my paper which will feature in the conference proceedings, and I will explain why that figure is as high as it is. It was due to the nature of the sample. In primary school, it's relatively stable, 102, 103 minutes. Globally, 101, 100 minutes. So relative stability in terms of the number of minutes per week on average throughout Europe. Now, what about curricular issues? Now, a number of countries in Europe, in fact, the majority of countries in Europe, are undertaking curriculum reforms. Some of those changes tend to redefine the purpose and the function of physical education. There very clearly is a broader health-related activity concept that is related to being seen as a counter to levels of obesity, sedentary lifestyles, increases in physical inactivity and so on, but also related to lifelong educational outcomes. So in terms of redefining, what's beginning to happen is that increasingly physical education is being linked with health education personal social development, and that's something that the UPIA survey in 2011-12 found, and also the worldwide survey did as well. My point, however, is that there is still the issue of the policy of rhetoric. On the one hand, we're here saying we have a broad and balanced curriculum, and that's highlighted in Northern Ireland. I can actually cite Northern Ireland simply because this is published document, where it refers to the government document a balanced and broadly based curriculum that promotes etc., 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 rather like the European Resolution of 2007. But when we look at the reality of what's actually happening in terms of what is being taught, in terms of contact activity areas, you don't have to be a mathematical genius to realise that when you start to look at in primary school, the proportion of curriculum time devoted to dance, games, gymnastics, outdoor activities, swimming, track and field, and other activities, 41%, that's the 2007 figure. It's 40% now, not much of a change. Gymnastics, not much of a change. Track and field, if anything, more track and field being taught than several years ago. In secondary school, we have a similar scenario. Now, when you add the percentage figures together, you begin to find that in 2013 that 3/4 of the curriculum are actually devoted to games, gymnastics, track and field athletics, and a similar finding the same level for the secondary schools as well. So, on the one hand, it's the broad and balanced curriculum that we have. That's the policy rhetoric. The reality is that we haven't moved away from this predisposition towards games and track and field. And indeed, the Eurolife report actually refers to, among the mandatory activities in schools, games are most common. After games, gymnastics and athletics. Little has changed in the last 20 years, despite education reforms. Let me move on to school community pathways. Here, notice that in relation to the rest of the world, Europe comes out quite well in terms of, yes, 68% of countries claim that they have formed community pathway links between schools and wider community providers. And that can be activity, recreation, sports clubs, etc. Globally, only 27% of the countries. So Europe is well ahead in the games as well, in terms of having single community links. Compare that with 2007, in Europe is 55, so there's been an increase there. And globally, 39%, there's been an increase there. There are a number of reasons why there are shortfalls in community school links. Recognition limitation of key ages and so on and so forth. And what I have done in the longer version of the paper is identify the kinds of links that are most popular, most common throughout Europe. And the most popular area is in competitive sport. Okay? Not in recreational physical activities, it's competitive sport. So, inter-school, inter-regional competitions, national competitions, and so on. That's where the school community links are most. Now, I think what we need to consider, both as academics and professionals, is where we stand on these kind of issues. Very clearly, if there are no philosophical shifts, and there are philosophical shifts, then we should realise that physical education is not in a stand-alone position. It cannot resolve obesity levels. It cannot resolve sedentary lifestyle when you only deliver at best 101 minutes per week. In order to resolve some of those issues, we need a joined-up thinking approach. And one of those approaches is having pathway partnerships, and I, for one, see those as a key to future directions. Now, if you move in that direction, what you're intending to do is to bring in another shift in the physical education tapestry. The Eurodance report also makes references to school community pathway links, and it claims that the presence of local community sports infrastructure may increase opportunities for organised physical activity and enhance the quality of school provision. Concluding comments. This very brief overview, no doubt, has given quite a distorted picture of how PE is progressing in Europe, if not in the world. And I am the first one to admit that there are some wonderful examples of good practice in many schools, in many countries in Europe. But on the other hand, the research evidence suggests, UPIA has found the same, Eurodance has found the same, other surveys in national and other intercontinental surveys, find that the concerns are persistent. And so what we have here is a mixed messages scenario. On the one hand, there is evidence of positive, effective policy initiatives, European resolution, council recommendations, etc. In some countries, stabilisation and little change. Think about that in the context of your own country. Is it stable? Is there little change in the last 13 years in my country? Or is there a lack of political will and concerns are such that there is continuing marginalisation of physical education? Now, what the research evidence is suggesting is that there are gaps between policies and implementation. Here we go again, the gap between hope and happening. The crux of the problem is the gap between policy and reality. There are widespread inadequacies in facility equipment supply. There is disquiet about teacher supply and the quality of primary schools. There is inadequate provision and uptake of professional development opportunities. There are deficiencies in curriculum time allocation with unrealised prescriptions, guidelines, and even in some countries, reductions. My own country is a good example of that at the moment. The relevance and quality of physical education curricula. Are they curriculum relevant? What is the quality? Are they high quality programs? There is predominance of the competitive form of discourse which tend to limit participation options rather than expand children's horizons. There are concerns about levels of curriculum implementation and monitoring of physical education. In some countries, there is no monitoring whatsoever. In others, there is very rigorous monitoring. And finally, there clearly is insufficient, inadequate school community. So, in terms of the winner, and I want to take the more positive approach, with which direction of the future sustainability of PE, I think there are a number of fundamental questions that you and I have to ask. How can PE better serve pupils and society in a dynamic, ever-changing world? 2, what should we be teaching in physical education? 3, how can teachers structure class experiences more effectively? 4, what changes do we need to make in schools and wider community settings and professional preparation programs? And, last but by no means least here, what new challenges might we face in the future? Very clearly, it is imperative that monitoring should occur. Indeed, the Council of Europe has called for regular PE reviews. And they've actually suggested that reviews be carried out every 5 years. That might help to begin to convert some of those promises into reality, and so give a safer future to PD. Now, clearly at the moment, we have inadequate watching briefs. There is need for better and more quality baseline national data. And here, and this is the penultimate point that I want to make, is I think there is a role for FIEP Europe to play in terms of devising a monitoring system, and I think that could be linked very well with what UPIA also doing from the professional side. So maybe the alliance of those two associations will be a crucial step forward in European initiatives to bring about reality rather than promise. So, if we have monitoring, if we have policy principles, if we have action agenda initiatives, and if we have relevant and quality programs, it leaves us with a secure blue sky world for public for physical education. Thank you.